The town of Maplewood had the kind of quiet charm that made time slow down. Cobblestone streets, flower baskets hanging from vintage lampposts, and the comforting smell of cinnamon rolls from the local bakery painted an atmosphere that whispered peace. For Julian Hayes, however, the town's stillness was a sharp contrast to the storm he carried inside him. Once a successful architect in Chicago, Julian had walked away from the skyline he helped shape after tragedy fractured the very foundation of his life. The death of his younger brother in a car accident he blamed himself for had sent him spiraling. Therapy hadn't helped. Friends drifted. Work became meaningless. And so he moved to Maplewood, renting a small, weathered cottage on the edge of town to escape the noise of a life that no longer made sense. Every morning, Julian wandered into the town's tiny bookstore cafe, the Nest, more for the silence than the coffee. It was a place where no one knew who he used to be or what he'd lost. He'd sit at the corner table, sketching in his worn notebook, lines and shadows bleeding across the page without purpose. He spoke to no one until the day she arrived. Her name was Clara Monroe, and she entered like spring sunlight through dusty blinds, gentle, curious, and warm. She wasn't loud or showy, but there was something about her presence that stirred something Julian hadn't felt in a long time. She had chestnut hair pulled into a messy braid, glasses that kept sliding down her nose, and a canvas tote filled with books and wallflowers. A preschool teacher who had just moved into town for a fresh start, Clara had that rare kind of heart that always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Their first interaction wasn't grand or cinematic. It was simple. She accidentally took his coffee from the counter. "I think that's mine," Julian said, his voice low and unsure. Pointing at the cup she had just picked up, Clara looked at the cup and then at him, her cheeks turning pink. "Oh, sorry. Yours is the vanilla latte, right?" "Mine's the chai. I should have read the label rookie mistake on day one." She smiled, half embarrassed, half charmed by her own clumsiness. Julian nodded, managing a faint, polite smile. Normally, he would have just let it slide and retreated, but something about her made him stay a little longer. She stood there for a second and then tilted her head slightly. "You're new here too?" He hesitated. "Kind of. Been here a few months." "Oh, nice. I just moved in yesterday." "I teach preschool, so I figured I'd introduce myself to the caffeine gods before the chaos begins." She extended a hand. "I'm Clara." Julian looked at her hand like it was foreign, as if he'd forgotten what it meant to connect with someone. Slowly he took it. "Julian." There was a pause, an unspoken beat of recognition that passed between them. Clara didn't push for more. She just offered a smile that felt like home and made her way to her table by the window, leaving a subtle floral trail in the air. Julian returned to his seat, but the page before him, once covered in aimless sketches, now bore the faint outline of a face. Her face. Over the next few days, they kept running into each other at the Nest, in the town library, at the farmer's market, where Clara would pick out overripe peaches with childlike excitement. She had a way of talking to everyone like they mattered, asking the cashier how her day was, complimenting a stranger's scarf, waving at the mailman with genuine warmth. Julian, on the other hand, kept his world small and guarded. But somehow, Clara kept stepping into it with ease, never demanding space, just occupying it with gentle grace. One rainy afternoon, Clara saw Julian sketching again and couldn't resist approaching his table. "You're an artist?" "Architect," he replied quietly, not looking up. "Used to be." She pulled out the chair across from him, uninvited but not unwelcome. "You still draw. That counts." Julian's pencil paused. "Habit." "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe it's hope." He looked up then, reading her eyes. They weren't full of pity, just understanding. The kind of look that said she didn't need to know his whole story to care. From that moment, something began to shift. Julian didn't realize it then, but the walls he'd built so carefully around his brokenness had started to crack, letting in the faintest hint of light, Clara's light. She never pried, never asked him to explain his silences or why he looked so tired even after a full night's rest. Instead, she offered small kindnesses, a scone left on his table, a recommendation for a book that might make him feel something, a smile that always felt like a choice. Their conversations grew, slow and hesitant at first. Julian found himself looking forward to her laugh, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her students, or how she couldn't pass a flower stand without stopping to smell every bloom. She was color in a world he painted gray, a reminder that not everything beautiful needed to be perfect to matter. And for Clara, there was something about Julian's quiet presence that drew her in. He wasn't like the others, loud, performative, or charming on cue. He was thoughtful, observant, with a sadness behind his eyes that made her want to understand him without fixing him. She sensed the heaviness he carried, though he never named it, and she respected the space he needed while gently offering company when he wanted it. One morning, as they walked side by side down Maplewood's tree-lined Main Street, Julian surprised himself by speaking first. "Why Maplewood?" he asked, glancing sideways. Clara smiled. "I needed a place that felt like healing. Somewhere slow, somewhere kind." Julian nodded. "And is it?" She looked up at the soft golden leaves falling around them. "It's getting there." So was he. That evening, back at his cottage, Julian stared at a blank page in his sketchbook. But this time, he wasn't empty. He drew Clara sitting under a tree, surrounded by laughing children, hair loose in the wind, light in her eyes. For the first time in months, he felt something bloom in his chest. Not grief, not guilt. Hope. And it had her name written all over it. The days after their first meeting, drifted by like mist rolling over a quiet lake, gentle, unhurried, and quietly stirring. Liam Walker returned to his apartment that night after meeting Ava with something he hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. Not full, not lasting, but something flickered inside him. A spark, maybe. He sat in his modest living room, surrounded by unpacked boxes and blank walls that still echoed loneliness. Even though he had lived there for 8 months, it never quite felt like home. He had always told himself he didn't need comfort. After everything, after losing his mother to cancer and walking away from a promising career in architecture, when the pressure became unbearable, Liam had folded inward. Like a closing book, quiet, hidden. He now worked as a part-time restorer at an antique furniture shop. It was quiet work, dusty, solitary, and that suited him. He liked breathing life into broken things. At least furniture didn't walk away. It didn't leave. His world was quiet, intentionally so. Mornings were coffee and silence. Afternoons were varnish and sandpaper. Nights were books he'd never finished reading. He had no need for parties or people. That version of him had existed once, before life taught him how temporary joy could be. But ever since, Ava stumbled into his quiet world, smiling with apologetic charm and shaking snow from her hair like she had walked out of a soft daydream. Something about the silence felt different, louder, emptier. He found himself remembering her eyes, not just the color, but the way they paused on people, like she genuinely saw them. He remembered how her voice had a lilting rhythm, like she was used to filling quiet spaces with warmth. She'd been the first stranger in a long time who didn't look at him like he was incomplete. Ava. Monroe's world was entirely different, warm, bustling, painted with hopeful brushstrokes. She worked as a children's therapist at a community center downtown. Her days were filled with tiny voices, small hands, and big feelings. She was the kind of person who carried tissues in her bag, band-aids in her purse, and hope in her pockets. Even sunshine can come from places that have known darkness. When Ava was 14, her father walked out, leaving behind only a note and a hollow silence. Her mother, once a vibrant woman who taught music and hummed while folding laundry, wilted under the weight of abandonment. Ava had grown up quickly, not out of rebellion, but necessity. She knew how to make dinner, balance a checkbook, and read. Adult worry in the lines of her mother's face before she ever understood her own heart. Now in her late 20s, Ava lived in a small rented house near the edge of town. It was cozy, overcrowded with books and mismatched furniture, and always smelling faintly of vanilla and old paper. She filled it with life, with stories, with hand-painted quotes on the walls and little plants in cracked teacups. She had built a life rooted in kindness. But her kindness wasn't naive, it was forged in survival. She loved with intention. She noticed the forgotten. She listened between the silences. That's why Liam's silence didn't scare her. It intrigued her. Their town, Maplewood, was a place where autumn came early and lingered long. Streets were lined with old trees that blushed gold and crimson every fall. Corner cafes still wrote their specials on chalkboards, and people waved, even if they didn't know your name. There was something nostalgic about it, like stepping into a place you'd swear you'd been before in a dream. Maplewood's downtown was nestled beside a winding river that reflected the skies like a secret. Ava often walked there after work, letting her mind drift with the current. On Saturdays, she volunteered at the local library's children's storytelling hour. And every Thursday, she ran a support group for teens navigating anxiety and loss. She believed in second chances, in slow healing. In unseen battles. Liam, on the other hand, avoided the river. Too many reflections, perhaps. He walked alleyways and quiet back streets on his way to work. The antique shop was tucked between a flower store and a barber shop, owned by a widow named Margaret, who wore too much lavender perfume and never once asked him why he always looked like he was halfway out the door. She simply gave him work, respected his space, and every Friday handed him a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. She understood broken men. Her husband had been one. As days passed, Liam and Ava crossed paths again. First at the cafe near the bookstore, she offered him her extra chair without hesitation. Then again at the bookstore itself, she recommended a book he hadn't asked about, gently convincing him that it was worth the read. "It's quiet but brave," she had said, like people who don't say much but feel everything. He didn't know whether she was describing the book or him. He began walking by the community center without meaning to, and she, curious but cautious, found herself passing the antique shop on her way home more often than usual. They didn't dive into each other's lives, not yet, but there was something magnetic about their presence, an unspoken awareness, a comfort in simply being near. Their backstories, though different, carried similar wounds: abandonment, loss, quiet grief. Yet while Liam built walls, Ava planted gardens. It was the contrast that intrigued them. Both. She was sunlight through a crack in his fortress. He was the stillness she sometimes longed for in her chaotic, overgiving world. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled gently in the distance, Liam stood just inside the antique shop's doorway, watching the sky. Ava, caught in the downpour without an umbrella, rushed under the nearest awning, which happened to be his. They shared a quiet smile. The rain tapping on the metal roof filled the silence between them. Ava pushed wet strands of hair behind her ear, her cheeks flushed with surprise. "I swear I don't plan these accidental meetings," she said with a breathless laugh. "Maybe they're not accidents," Liam replied before he could stop himself. That was the first time she saw it, the tiny crack in his quiet armor. As the days folded into weeks, Ayan and Lila found themselves drawn to each other more naturally than either of them expected. What started as a simple arrangement, her helping with the garden, him fixing the lighting, soon turned into a rhythm neither wanted to interrupt. Every visit from Lila brought with it a fresh breeze of laughter, questions, and shared silences that spoke louder than words. Ayan, once hidden behind the thick fog of grief and solitude, now looked forward to the afternoons when she'd appear on his porch with a fresh batch of banana, muffins, or a wildflower tucked behind her ear. One warm afternoon, they sat on the back steps of Ayan's home, sipping lemonade she had made. The late sun was brushing everything in hues of orange, and the air smelled like fresh earth and cut grass. Lila looked out at the small patch of garden they'd revived together and smiled. "I think it's finally starting to look like something," she said, brushing a curl behind her ear. Ayan followed her gaze, then looked at her instead. "It is," he said softly. "But honestly, it's not the flowers I've been noticing grow." She turned to him, confused at first, until she saw the look in his eyes, warm, unguarded, and steady. Lila felt her breath catch for just a moment, unsure if he meant her, or something deeper. The moment lingered in the quiet between them, stretching longer than it should have. But neither of them looked away. Later that week, they ended up on a short trip to the local farmer's market. It had been Lila's idea, and though Ayam initially hesitated, he found himself saying yes before he could overthink it. Walking through the buzzing crowd of vendors, colors, and smells, Ayan felt oddly alive. Lila held up a bunch of sunflowers to his chest and tilted her head. "You'd look amazing holding these." Broody man with sunshine in his hands, she teased. Ayan smirked. "I think you're confusing me with someone far more poetic." "No," she said, softer now. "I think I'm finally seeing who you are beyond all that silence." There was something about the way she said it, like she wasn't trying to fix him, just understand him, that made Ayan's defenses weaken. He ended up buying the sunflowers and handed them to her instead. "For your room," he said. "Or for your sunshine." Her eyes sparkled with something unspoken. The next few weeks became a blur of shared routines. Lila brought new books for Ayan to read, often leaving notes in the margins. He, in return, repaired her old radio so she could listen to her favorite jazz station again. They cooked together on some evenings, awkwardly at first, then seamlessly, like they'd been doing it for years. Every gesture between them felt unspokenly intimate. The way he brushed flour from her cheek, or the way she refilled his coffee without asking, always knowing just how he liked it. One evening, during a sudden downpour, they found themselves trapped in the garden shed. They were soaked, shivering, and laughing uncontrollably at how poorly timed their work session had been. Ayan handed her an old flannel jacket, his fingertips brushing her arms. "You're freezing," he said, his voice quiet now. "I don't mind," Lila replied, her voice trembling slightly, not just from the cold. Their eyes locked. There were no jokes this time, no teasing banter. Only a storm outside, and a different kind of storm brewing in the space between them. Ayan stepped a little closer, his hand still holding the edges of the jacket. For the first time, he allowed his heart to speak louder than his fear. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he whispered. "This, whatever this is." Lila reached for his hand, not to hold it, but to rest her fingers lightly against his palm. "You don't have to define it yet, just feel it." Their faces were inches apart, breath mingling in the damp air, but they didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The closeness itself was enough to leave them both trembling. It was the kind of moment that carved a permanent memory into the soul, raw, delicate, unspoken, but deeply understood. That night, Ayan couldn't sleep. He replayed the look in her eyes, the calm she brought, and the way her presence seemed to fill the void he never thought could be filled. Lila, too, sat awake on her bed, smiling softly to herself. She wasn't naive. She saw the cracks in him, the places still healing. But what touched her was how open he was becoming in her presence, like he wanted to let her in, even if he didn't know how. Days later, they went on a hike together, Lila's idea again. Ayan was skeptical about the climb, but he couldn't say no to her excitement. They reached a quiet overlook just before sunset, the valley stretching below them in golds and blues. She sat beside him on a flat rock, pulling her knees to her chest. "I used to come here when I needed to think," she said. "Or when life got too loud? Does it still get loud?" He asked gently. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But being with you, it quiets things." He turned toward her, visibly moved. "You do that for me too." Their hands found each other naturally this time, fingers intertwining without effort. There was no declaration of love yet, but it was there in the silence, the stolen glances, the care. Every shared breath, every gentle touch was slowly dissolving the walls Ayan had built around his heart. Lila didn't try to rush him. She knew broken things needed time, and she was willing to wait, not to be his healer, but to be beside him while he healed Dot and Ayan. For the first time in years, wasn't afraid of being seen. He was starting to realize that love wasn't something he needed to earn or be worthy of. It could be given freely, especially by someone like Lila, who didn't need perfection. She just needed honesty, and he was slowly learning how to give her that. Dot. Not all love stories begin with fireworks. Some begin in silence. And between Ayan and Lila, the quiet was finally beginning to sound like music. Dot, as autumn settled over the quiet town, painting the trees in hues of amber and gold. Lily and Nathan found themselves drawn to each other in ways neither had anticipated. Their daily conversations turned into late-night phone calls, and quick meetings for coffee stretched into long walks along the riverbank. There was an unspoken comfort between them, an ease that made silence feel safe and words feel precious. One rainy evening, Nathan invited Lily over for dinner. He cooked a humble attempt at pasta with garlic bread that ended in light teasing and laughter when he nearly burned the sauce. They ate by the window, listening to the steady patter of rain, while soft music played in the background. Nathan opened up about his childhood, the loneliness he had carried growing up without parents, and how that shaped the guarded man he had become. Lily listened, not with pity, but with understanding in her eyes, and then she shared her own pieces, the heartbreak of losing her fiancé in an accident 3 years ago, the guilt that still lingered like a shadow in her smile. Nathan didn't rush to fill the silence after her words. He simply reached across the table and held her hand. That small gesture, filled with quiet compassion, broke something open inside her. Dot. Their emotional intimacy deepened with each shared moment. Nathan started showing up to Lily's book readings at the library, sitting in the back but always smiling when their eyes met. She began leaving little notes in his workshop, quotes from books, scribbled encouragements, even a doodle or two. It wasn't grand gestures that built their connection, but the quiet consistency of showing up for each other. One night, they stood on Lily's porch watching the stars. Nathan looked at her, his voice low. "I never thought I'd be the kind of man someone like you could love." Lily turned toward him, her eyes gentle. "That's where you're wrong. You've always been that man. You just didn't know it." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and though he didn't kiss her yet, the moment was more intimate than any kiss could be. It was a promise forming in the space between them, soft, slow, and sure. With every passing week, their bond became deeper, more layered. Lily wasn't trying to fix Nathan. She accepted him. And Nathan wasn't trying to be someone else for Lily. He just wanted to be the man she saw in him. Dot. It was in the smallest moments that love quietly took root. The way she laughed when he made coffee too strong, how he memorized her favorite poetry lines, how she smiled just a little softer when she talked to him. They were falling in love, not with an explosion, but with a steady rhythm of hearts learning to trust again. Winter crept in slowly, dusting the streets with frost and thinning the daylight into soft gray evenings. What had once been warmth and laughter between Nathan and Lily began to shift, not because the love was fading, but because the ghosts they had both kept at bay started to stir. Nathan grew quiet again. He'd often sit in his workshop for hours, the radio humming softly while he sanded pieces of wood without finishing them. Lily noticed the way he avoided eye contact when she brought up the future weekend plans, trips, even simple things like decorating her porch for Christmas. He'd change the subject or offer a vague smile. It wasn't that he didn't want to be with her. It was that something inside him, something broken and buried, was afraid of being happy, of depending on someone again, only to lose it all. One evening, after they had shared dinner at her place, Lily stood by the window while Nathan sat at the edge of the couch, his shoulders tense. "You've been pulling away from me," she said softly, her voice laced with concern. Not accusation. Nathan didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor. "It's not you." "Then what is it?" she asked gently. "Because I'm not asking you for forever, Nathan. I'm just asking you to let me in. Let me stand with you in whatever darkness is still following you." He looked up then, and his eyes shimmered with something raw and unguarded. "I don't know how to be with someone who isn't going to leave. Everyone always does. I don't want to need you, Lily, because if I need you, and something happens to you, if you decide I'm too much, or you leave like the rest, I don't think I could survive that." His voice cracked on the last word. Lily's heart ached. Loving someone isn't weakness, Nathan. And needing someone, it's not a failure. I'm not going anywhere, but I can't keep standing in the doorway of your heart, waiting to be let in. You have to choose it. The silence between them stretched painfully long. Then, quietly, Nathan stood. "I think I need time to think." She nodded slowly, her eyes stinging but resolute. "Then take it, but please, don't let fear make your decision for you." He left that night without kissing her goodbye. For days, there was nothing. No messages, no phone calls. Lily went to the library, tried to keep her routine, but her heart felt heavy. The silence between them was a wall she didn't know how to break through. Nathan, meanwhile, walked through the days with a storm inside him. He wandered the streets they used to walk together. He reread the notes she'd left in his workshop drawer, every one of them a quiet testament to a love he didn't feel worthy of. One night, standing alone in the middle of his workshop, he broke down. He wept not just for Lily, but for all the years he had wasted locking his heart behind walls of self-protection, for the love he had been offered freely and yet hesitated to accept. And in the stillness of that moment, he realized something. With piercing clarity, Lily had never asked him to be perfect. She had only ever asked him to be present, and he had run not because he didn't love her, but because he did. More than he had ever thought possible, but love, he finally understood, was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to stay despite it. He had to make it. Right. The wind was sharp that evening as Lily closed the library, pulling her coat tighter around her and trying to silence the ache in her chest that had grown louder with each passing day. She had told herself she wouldn't look for him, wouldn't beg for clarity, but her heart wasn't made for half goodbyes, and his absence had settled into her like winter settling into the bones. She turned the corner onto her street, head down, steps slow, when she saw him, Nathan, standing on her porch, holding something in his hands. For a moment, she couldn't move. The breath caught in her throat as if her body hadn't yet decided if it wanted to run to him or turn away to protect itself. But he turned just then, their eyes meeting across the quiet distance. And in his gaze, she saw all the words he hadn't spoken: remorse, hope, fear, and above all, love. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft but firm, carrying in the cold. I let fear win. But I couldn't stay away, Lily. I thought pushing you away would protect me, but all it did was show me how lost I am without you. She stepped closer, slowly, searching his eyes for truth, for change, for the man she believed he could become, and it was there, etched into the lines of his face, carved into the way his hands trembled just slightly as he reached for her. I don't want perfect, she whispered. I just want you, real, present, trying. He nodded, the tightness in his chest breaking open as he handed her the small wooden box he'd been carrying. She opened it to find it beautifully carved. Figure of two hands, one holding the other, protective and gentle. I made it for you, he said, because that's what you've done for me. Held me, steady, even when I was shaking. Tears filled her eyes as she reached up, touching his face with the tenderness of someone who had loved through the storm and was now seeing the sunrise. That night, they didn't talk much. They sat on her couch, wrapped in a shared blanket, hands intertwined like a silent promise. The next days weren't suddenly perfect. Nathan still struggled with the shadows that clung to his past, and Lily had to remind herself to let him grow at his own pace, but they were together. He came to her with his heart open a little more, each day showing up not just with gifts or apologies, but with presence. Dinners cooked badly, but with effort. Stories from his past told through a cracking voice, laughter shared in moments that used to hold silence. And Lily, for her part, learned to receive without rescuing, to stand beside him instead of always trying to fix him. It became their rhythm to people choosing each other, not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. Nathan began teaching small woodworking classes at the community center, encouraged by Lily, and even started building a bookshelf for her growing collection. He smiled more, and when he held her now, it wasn't with the desperation of someone afraid to lose, but with the calm confidence of someone who finally believed he was allowed to love and be loved in return. Healing wasn't a straight line, but in each step they found joy. And in every small, ordinary moment, a shared coffee, a rainy afternoon spent reading, his hand brushing hers as they walked, Nathan realized something he'd never believed. Before, he wasn't broken beyond repair, because she hadn't just loved him when he was broken. She had loved him into becoming whole. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Lily woke to the scent of cinnamon and coffee, wafting from the kitchen, sunlight stretching through the curtains and pooling gently on the hardwood floor. For a moment, she just lay there, cocooned in warmth, listening to the soft clatter of pans and the low hum of a song Nathan had started to hum whenever he cooked. It was imperfectly off-key, but it was her favorite sound in the world, now not. Because of the tune, but because it meant he was there, choosing every day to stay, to try, to love. She rose slowly, pulling the robe tighter around her as she padded into the kitchen, where Nathan stood in pajama pants and a flour-dusted t-shirt, completely absorbed in flipping pancakes that were slightly too thick but made with stubborn care. He turned when he saw her, his smile lazy and still sleepy. "You weren't supposed to be up yet," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple as she slid into a chair. "I was trying to surprise you." "You did," she said, her heart full to the brim, not because of the pancakes or the coffee, but because this life, this morning, this man, had once been a distant dream whispered in the silence of her most aching nights. He sat across from her, reaching for her hand across the table, their fingers lacing effortlessly, a gesture that had become second nature. As they ate, talked, and laughed, Lily couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come from pain to peace, from brokenness to something solid, whole, and beautiful. Nathan still had days when the shadows crept back in, days when his voice faltered or his eyes dimmed with the memories he didn't always share. But now, he let her in. He didn't run, he didn't hide. And Lily, in turn, had softened in ways she never expected, learning patience, trusting his process. and believing that love wasn't in grand gestures, but in showing up. They began building a life together slowly, intentionally planting herbs in mismatched pots on the balcony, writing little notes on the fridge, reading the same book together, and pausing to discuss their favorite lines. Nathan finished the bookshelf and filled it with her favorites, carving a tiny heart on the side that only she knew was there. On their 1 year anniversary of the night he showed up on her porch, he took her back to that same spot, not with rings or roses, but with a small folded letter. In it, he had written everything he had once been too afraid to say, how she had seen him when he couldn't see himself, how her love had never demanded change but inspired it, how every part of him, every scar, every fear had been met by her with grace. Loving you, he had written, felt like the moment I learned to breathe again. She cried, of course, and he held her, of course. And in that embrace was a quiet vow, unspoken but deeply felt, that this wasn't just healing. This was home. Seasons changed around them, but their love stayed, a constant, steady rhythm woven into every sunrise shared, every setback faced, every choice made to stay when leaving would have been easier. They were not the same people they had been at the beginning. Lily had grown stronger in her gentleness, and Nathan had discovered strength in his vulnerability, but they were still them, only more whole, more open, more real. And as they stood, one evening under the same stars that had once witnessed their silences and storms, Nathan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You loved me when I didn't know how to be loved," he whispered. "And now I want to spend every day learning how to love you better." Lily turned, brushing his hair from his forehead, smiling through her tears. "You already do," she said, "every single day." And in that moment, under a sky stitched with stars and a future they were no longer afraid of, they knew they had found something rare, not a perfect love, but a brave one that stayed, one that healed, one that chose them again and again,